Mats, I can take your microphone or you can give it to Rebecca. I'll put it here. So thank you. I'm Katarina Tracz. I'm the Deputy Director of the Stockholm Frivärld Forum. Just a few practical details. Once the internet starts working, which I truly hope is soon, the hashtag on Twitter will be SNEE14 with capital letters. So SNEE14. Also, restrooms are located outside the exits to your left. And yes, that's about it. And now I'm very honored to leave the floor to the Ambassador of United States here in Sweden, Mr. Mark Brzezinski. Please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Katarina. Thank you, Frivärld, for inviting me to speak today on U.S. security policy in the wake of Russia's aggression and illegal annexation of Crimea. Let me start by making an obvious observation. Today, Russia is in an unpredictable place, so a conference like this is very timely. Russia's actions in Ukraine have clearly altered the security environment in Europe. We need to closely analyze what this means for security in Northern Europe and assess the effects it is having beyond the region. It is clear that Russia has violated Ukraine's territorial sovereignty. In so doing, it has breached its commitments under the United Nations Charter, under the Budapest Agreement, as well as under the agreement signed in Geneva on April 17th that was designed to improve the security conditions and to find political solutions to the conflict. As Secretary of State Kerry said last Thursday, the Geneva Agreement is not open to interpretation, it is not vague, it is not subjective, and it is not optional. What was agreed to in Geneva is as simple as it is specific. Yet Russia has not only failed to meet a single one of its obligations, Russia has also actively engaged in distraction, deception, and destabilization. Not a single Russian official has publicly gone on television in Ukraine and called on the separatists to support the Geneva Agreement, to support the stand down, to give up their weapons, and to get out of Ukrainian buildings. President Obama said last month in his speech to European young people that, quote, just because Russia has a deep history with Ukraine does not mean that it should be able to dictate Ukraine's future. The U.S. remains committed to the security of Europe and to the Transatlantic Alliance. I want to underline and highlight that. As the Ukraine crisis has unfolded, we have taken a firm and immediate measures to support our NATO allies, as I will explain a little bit later. I'd like to first make a few comments on Sweden and Sweden's relationship with NATO. The United States sees Sweden as a uniquely strong and close partner of NATO and as a wise voice on behalf of the West. I am aware that membership in NATO for Sweden is a topic that has been discussed more frequently in light of recent events. This is an important and timely debate, and there are many who believe that NATO membership holds great potential to address Sweden's security needs. Any decision on Sweden's relationship with NATO, including the issue of membership, is of course solely up to the Swedes. If Sweden should ever take this step, I know Sweden would be a welcome and pragmatic voice around the table in the North Atlantic Council. Let's now talk about the neighbor to the east. Since the end of the Cold War, more than 2 decades ago, the United States and Europe have made clear and have walked the walk that our interest was fully integrated Russia, politically and economically, into Europe and into the international community. But that was predicated on an expectation that Russia would play by the economic and security rules of the road, the rules that govern everyone, as well as international law and the norms and principles that govern responsible international relations. There's unfortunate precedent for Russia's action in Ukraine. In 2008, Russia violated Georgia's territorial sovereignty and continues to this day to occupy Abkhazia and South Ossetia. While Putin may not be trying to recreate a Soviet bloc, he is nostalgic to extend Russia's reach as part of the Putin doctrine. What we have seen in Ukraine is obviously a very, very dramatic example of that. President Obama has noted very clearly that what Russia has done in Ukraine, and specifically in Crimea, violates a sovereign nation's territorial integrity. In President Obama's speech last month, he said that Russia's leadership is challenging truths that only a few weeks ago seemed self-evident, that in the 21st century, the borders of Europe cannot be redrawn with force, that international law matters, that people and nations can make their own decisions about the future. He also noted that we live at a moment when big nations shouldn't bully smaller nations. About a week ago, the US, the EU, Russia, and Ukraine met in Geneva and agreed on concrete actions to avoid further escalation. Ukraine is making good on its commitments, but Russia has refused to take a single step in the right direction. Russian leaders are making outrageous statements, for example, that a well-equipped, disciplined military forces in matching uniforms are merely local activists. As international observers have made known, prior to Russia's intervention, there were no assaults on the people in Donetsk. The country was stable and peaceful. NATO's supreme allied commander in Europe put it this way: what is happening in eastern Ukraine is a military operation that is well planned and organized, and we assess that it is being carried out at the direction of Russia. On April 24th, Secretary of State Kerry commented on the recent movement of Russian troops right up to Ukraine's borders and said the following: "Let me be clear, if Russia continues in this direction, it will not just be a grave mistake, it will be an expensive mistake. Already, the international response to the choices made by Russia's leaders is taking its toll on Russia's economy. Prime Minister Medvedev has alluded to the cost Russia is already paying. Even President Putin has acknowledged it." The world will remain united for Ukraine, and President Putin is facing a choice. If Russia does not de-escalate, the international community will make sure that the cost for Russia is high. The US has constructively endorsed the EU's Eastern Partnership Program, led by Sweden and Poland, to advance European integration. It can never be seen as something that is bad to offer another country the opportunity to develop its democracy and to trade with other countries. The US has a long-term commitment to support Ukraine and its European aspirations. We have already signed a $1 billion loan guarantee to help Ukraine meet its financial obligations and protect vulnerable citizens from the impact of economic adjustments. We have also announced a new package of assistance to help Ukraine pursue political and economic reform and strengthen the partnership between the United States and Ukraine. These funds contributed an $11.4 million package of U.S. assistance that will promote free, fair, and inclusive presidential elections. An additional $8 million of non-lethal military assistance is going to the Ukrainian Armed Forces and to the State Border Guard Service. We are also working to help Ukraine address other needs, including by working to combat corruption, recover stolen assets, and reduce Ukraine's vulnerability to withstand politically motivated trade actions by Russia, including in the area of energy. Sweden has also been active in Ukraine with CETA. We need to glean from each other what needs to be done to build up governance and civil society and coordinate on overseas development assistance that is truly catalytic to progress in Ukraine. We want the May 25th presidential elections and subsequent constitutional process to be successful. A successful Ukraine will promote prosperity for its citizens and stability in Europe as a whole. Let me offer a few words in conclusion on the role of the United States in Europe. In 1949, the Washington Treaty creating NATO was signed. This act demonstrated a shared sense of the challenge and created the most successful and longest alliance in history. It remains the basis for U.S. engagement with European allies and partners. The United States remains committed to a strong transatlantic alliance. It remains committed to the security of Europe. It remains committed to the integration of Eastern Europe, and it remains committed to the values that the United States and Europe stand for together. This includes individual liberty, but also the rights of sovereign nations to make their own decisions and to have their sovereignty and territorial integrity respected. We are closely monitoring Russia's actions in the region and are in constant contact with our Baltic counterparts. The strategic importance and fundamental strength of our alliances and partnerships in this effort cannot be overstated. Our ability to lead strong coalitions is essential to making progress. It is incumbent on NATO to respond firmly, resolutely, and visibly. I'm sure that you've seen that the United States has increased to 10 the number of F-15s participating in the NATO Baltic air policing mission in Lithuania. We have also increased support to our eastern frontiers of NATO, including Poland, where a company-sized contingent of U.S. Army paratroopers arrived in Svidvin for training exercises. So as you can all see, we are ready and willing to support our allies. Article 5 remains the bedrock of the NATO alliance, and the United States' commitment to it is unshakable. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Please have a seat.
Thank you.
So let me just start out with pointing out to the audience that after this session, we will have no time for questions from the audience, since the ambassador is in a hurry. So I'll try to ask the questions that you're thinking. Let me start on a more philosophical level. In the year of 2014, what does the term transatlantic mean?
It means a unity of purpose and a shared sense of the challenge. We are all different countries with different historical experiences. Our democracies are very different. But there are values that bind us together. Take Sweden and the United States. Human rights, human dignity. I've been in Sweden for 2.5 years, and it is quite evident that the Swedes walk the walk in terms of the four corners of the globe in advancing and defending human rights and dignity. At this moment, Swedes stand shoulder to shoulder with the Americans in Afghanistan, far, far away, to advance those common values. It also means a shared sense of the challenge. What is happening in Ukraine has altered the security context in Northern Europe. And engagements like this conference this morning, but also joint planning, joint exercises, a division of labor, is part of that tactical implementation of a strategy to address a shared challenge. That's what the transatlantic community is about. And quite frankly, I think in the last couple of months, it's been impressive to see how these disparate countries have come together. We don't agree on everything, but we agree on a lot. And I think that that's sending an important message to President Putin and the Kremlin.
In your speech, you talk about the US being firmly committed in defending these transatlantic values. At the same time, we see that defense budgets in Europe are being cut, that a lot of the NATO members are not contributing as much as the US and others would wish. Do you think that we, the US and Europe, are prepared to pay the cost for defending these values?
Well, I think that the announcement last week by the alliance to consider an increase in defense spending to meet the challenges of our time, again, not just Sweden's challenges, but challenges shared on behalf of the West, is welcome and is the kind of walking the walk that has to be reflected across the Transatlantic Alliance. And I do not want to go into kind of the technical areas where I think spending should increase, because I don't have that capacity. But I do welcome that announcement last week.
Before this crisis in Ukraine, the US was focusing a lot on a so-called pivot to Asia. Is what we see nowadays, or what we see today, a pivoting back to Europe, in fact?
Well, I don't think that we pivoted away from Europe as we began to work closely with China as China takes on more of a geopolitical role. It is true that our relationship, that the Sino-US relationship has gone from an economic partnership to a geopolitical partnership, and we're working with Asia and with China in ways that we never have before. And President Obama is now in Asia, furthering that vision. But our work with Asia on geopolitical challenges was always meant to be done with the anchor of our engagement with the world, and that is Europe. And that has never ceased to be the case. So that would be my response to you there. I don't really think that it was a zero-sum game, as some analysts have made it to be, that working more with Asia means working less with Europe. Quite the contrary. It means working with Europe vis-à-vis Asia.
Earlier this weekend, the G7 released a statement, again claiming that they're deeply concerned over the events in Ukraine, again condemning Russia. Also yesterday, President Obama said that the US and Europe has to join forces in order to impose sanctions. And some of these sanctions are expected to be imposed already today.
That's right.
So we have heard some of this before. What is the difference this time?
Well, I think that what we're hearing now is more global unity as it pertains to the sanctions. And that's what the G7 statement reflected. And the sanctions aren't chosen willy-nilly. They're really targeted on individuals and institutions, banks, companies that provide technology transfer, that can boost those elements in Russia that are causing the problems. And I think you can see with the Standard & Poor's rating last week that this is beginning to have an effect. Not an effect that in the broader context we had wished for, because we want Russia to be part of the international community, not to have an economy with junk bond status. When I was working in the late 1990s as a director for Russia on the National Security Council under President Clinton, the goal was to integrate Russia and its people, its talented, able people, into the international community in every sense of the world, in every sense of the word. And that is still our hope. But we cannot let the aggression on Ukraine go unresponded to. That would be that would send the entirely worst message to Russia and create an entirely atrocious precedent for the international community.
In your speech, you also mentioned that we today live in a time where strong nations, military strong nations, cannot just bully their weaker neighbors or other countries. Yet, some argue that we now enter a new world order where, yet again, military capacity and military force are more crucial than international norms. What would you respond to these claims?
Well, that quote was a quote from President Obama in Brussels, and I think that he is entirely right, and that has been a message that we have heard resonate since Russia's aggression against Georgia. And it is a serious challenge to Europe that this kind of thing could be going on just beyond the eastern frontiers of the EU and NATO. Again, it is totally unacceptable for that to happen to the Ukrainian people, who also have been working for the success of their country economically, in terms of security, and we have to stand with them as they continue this effort, as we've been doing for the last 20 years. And to take advantage of that, to take advantage of the fact that they could come into Crimea and do what they did and annex an entire region, is completely unacceptable, and we're seeing the response now. It's not something that anyone embraces and welcomes. Moving assets to Lithuania and Poland is what has to happen, but there are many better contexts that I think we would all hope for in terms of this region. Instability